Okay, so we're just going to try to see if we can read the parts of these books that talk about the left and right brain hemispheres, and then kind of use that as a catalyst to have an increased understanding of parts of consciousness. So our conceptual idea is that parts exist on the spectrum where I know it's so cool the way that this records. Flips it so it's like right side when I'm viewing. Anyway, so the far right end of the spectrum is Muppet parts of consciousness. The far left end of the spectrum is Guardian parts of consciousness, and then in the middle are normal parts and Nightingale parts. So it goes Muppet, Nightingale, normal, Guardian, and parts occur along this spectrum where they have different roles, different jobs, different accessibilities. Moppets are extremely all right brain, Guardian parts are extremely all left brain, and then normals and Nightingales are right and left brain, respectively, like separately. I mean, but they have a little bit more access to experience the other brain hemispheres, kind of like the concept I'm working with. So we'll just kind of read through these, and then we'll be able to come back to this recording and just browse it and see if we can connect more of the dots, right? So left brain loves and desires order. It is logical, literal, linguistic, it likes words, and linear. It puts things in a sequence or order. The left brain loves that all four of these words begin with the letter L. It also loves lists. So words, the moments where we really love alliteration, I think, would be because we're connecting with the left brain hemisphere potentially. It's all about order, logic, taking things very literal, and having access to literacy. Linguistic, loving words, putting language to things, the language stuff, like language specifically with words. And linear, having things in a sequential order. Linear, having things in a sequential order. The right brain, on the other hand, is holistic and nonverbal, sending and receiving signals that allow us to communicate, such as facial expressions, eye contact, tone of voice, posture, and gestures. I'll say that again. The right brain is holistic and nonverbal, sending and receiving signals that allow us to communicate, such as facial expressions, eye contact, tone of voice, posture, and gestures. Instead of details and order, our right brain cares about the big picture, the meaning and the feeling of an experience, and specializes in images, emotions, and personal memories. So images, emotions, and personal memories. We get a gut feeling or a heartfelt sense from our right brain. Some say the right brain is more intuitive and emotional. But keep in mind that technically it's more accurate to talk about the side of the brain as more directly influenced by the body and lower brain areas. So I kind of think of it as left brain hemisphere is much more front brain prone, and right brain hemisphere is much more hind brain prone, or forebrain and hindbrained. Ugh. It can get complicated, but the basic idea is that while the left brain is logical, linguistic, and literal, the right brain is emotional, nonverbal, experiential, and autobiographical. Experiential, nonverbal, emotional, and autobiographical is right brain. And it doesn't care at all that these words don't begin with the same letter. So alliteration, love for alliteration is definitely left brain. You might think of it this way. The left brain cares about the letter of the law, more of those L's. As you know, as kids get older, they get really good at... I can't. As you know, as kids get older, they get really good at using this left brain thinking. I didn't shove her, I pushed her. The right brain, on the other hand, cares about the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. the emotions and experiences of relationships. Emotions and experiences of relationships. The left focuses on the text. The right is about the context. In terms of development, very young children are right hemisphere dominant, especially during their first 3 years. They haven't mastered the ability to use logic and words to express their feelings, and they live their lives completely in the moment, which is why they will drop everything to squat down and fully absorb themselves in watching a ladybug crawl along the sidewalk, not caring one bit if they are late for their toddler music class. Logic, responsibilities, and time do not exist for them yet. And this is a good note for creating the spectrum of age regression. But when a toddler begins asking why all the time, you know that the left brain is beginning to really kick in. Because our left brain likes to know the linear cause-effect relationships in the world and to express that logic with language. Think about our emotions. They're absolutely crucial if we are to live meaningfully, but we don't want them to completely rule our lives. If our right brain took over and we ignored the logic of our left brain, we would feel like we were drowning in images, bodily sensations, and what could feel like an emotional flood. But at the same time, we don't want to use only our left brain, divorcing our logic and language from our feelings and personal experiences. That would feel like living in an emotional desert. Denial of emotions or lacking a perspective can happen when we're too heavy in our left brain. We can become too literal, leaving us without a sense of perspective, where we miss the meaning that comes from putting things in context, which is a specialty of the right brain hemisphere. The right brain is in charge of reading nonverbal cues also. All right, so those notes were from The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and Tina Bryson. This next part is from The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. We now know that the two halves of the brain do speak different languages. The right is intuitive, emotional, visual, spatial, and tactile. The right brain is intuitive, emotional, visual, spatial, and tactual. That could be why things become two-dimensional when in a protector state of consciousness where the right brain is shut out, or a guardian state of consciousness with defensive protector state of consciousness being activated also. The world gets two-dimensional because there's no spatial orientation from the right brain hemisphere. The left brain is linguistic, sequential, and analytical. The left brain is linguistic, sequential, and analytical. While the left half of the brain does all the talking, the right half of the brain carries the music of the experience. It communicates through facial expressions and body language and by making the sounds of love and sorrow, by singing, swearing, crying, dancing, or mimicking. Say that again, that's a good one. While the left half of the brain does all the talking, the right half of the brain carries the music of the experience. It communicates through facial expression and body language. Okay, so we found the confirmation of the facial expression and body language. The musical rhythm and tones of voice would connect with Moppet parts, and then aspects of body language would connect with Nightingale parts. Facial features, muscular facial features would connect with Nightingale parts. Expressions in the eyes would connect with Moppet parts. That sounds good. This is continued from the other video from our phone where we were talking about parts. That note I mean specifically. Right brain, facial expressions, body language, and by making the sounds of love and sorrow, singing, swearing, crying, dancing, or mimicking. The right brain is the first to develop in the womb, and it carries the nonverbal communication between mothers and infants. We know the left hemisphere has come online when children start to understand language and learn how to speak. This enables them to name things, compare them, understand their interrelations, and begin to communicate their own unique subjective experiences to others. So when the left brain hemisphere is not active, that's when there's no language for the experiences. There's no way to verbalize or describe what's actually happening. And understanding the connectivity between the meanings of things and naming things. Like when there were those periods where I couldn't recognize objects, I couldn't identify the names or meanings of objects, that would be the left brain hemisphere being inaccessible. Name things, compare things, understand their interrelations, and begin to communicate their own unique subjective experiences to others. That's all when the left brain hemisphere is coming online and doing its stuff. The left and right sides of the brain also process the imprints of the past in dramatically different ways. The left brain hemisphere remembers facts, statistics, and the vocabulary of events. We call on it to explain our experiences and put them in order. The right brain stores memories of sound, touch, smell, and the emotions they evoke. It reacts automatically to voices, facial features, and gestures, and places experienced in the past. So, left brain remembers facts, statistics, and vocabulary of events. Left brain helps us explain our experience and put them in a sequential order, or in a linear way. And the right brain stores memories of sound, touch, smell, and emotions that are evoked. And right brain reacts automatically to voices, facial features, and gestures, and places that have been experienced in the past. So when we drive through a familiar area and our right brain hemisphere feels the familiarity, but there's no way to describe when, how, or from what, that's the right brain having an experience without the left brain. When we remember memory fragments, a single tactile sensation, a single sense of connection with smell, a single, it doesn't say sight, sound, a single sound, touch, smell, emotions. It doesn't specifically say visual, so we won't include that. But when there's a single tactile sense or a smell sense within the memory as a memory fragment, then that's right brain having experience without the left brain. When there's a memory of facts and meaning-making summaries, but without the personal connection with the experience, that's the left brain being active without the right brain. When we can describe something that happened, but we don't feel like it happened, that's left brain working without the right brain. And this is one reason why a brain lacking integration will not be fully helped through therapy, because if you're continually talking about stuff but not connecting to the things, it's just continuing the disintegrative experience where your left and right brain hemispheres are not making contact with one another. Integration doesn't have to do with the subconscious parts. It has to do with the unconscious states. Boom, infinite mic drops. Right brain recalls feels. What it recalls feels. When the right brain is recalling something, it feels like intuitive truth, the way things are. There's this intuitive feelings-based connection with it. And this is, so sometimes people can be said to favor one side or the other, but it's still the brain still runs smoothly when there's, contact with each other, integration to some degree. However, having one side or the other side shut down, even temporarily, or having one side cut off entirely, is disabling. Deactivation of the left hemisphere has a direct impact on the capacity to organize experience into logical sequences and to translate our shifting feelings and perceptions into words. Broca's area, which blacks out during flashbacks, is on the left side. Without sequencing, oh yeah, that's another thing to add to our ACC paper, is about how, or at least some paper, maybe the paper with the dissociative experiences. Yes, the dissociative experiences article we're writing. We would include the science of flashbacks from this book, and how parts of the brain literally go offline. There's not activity in them anymore, like Broca's area. Without sequencing, we can't identify cause and effect, grasp the long-term effects of our actions, or create coherent plans for the future. People who are very upset sometimes say they are losing their minds. In technical terms, they are experiencing the loss of executive functioning. When something reminds traumatized people of the past, their right brain reacts as if the traumatic event were happening in the present. But because their left brain is not working very well, they may not be aware that they are re-experiencing and reenacting the past. They are just furious, terrified, enraged, ashamed, or frozen. After the emotional storm passes, they may look for somebody or something to blame. They behaved the way they did because you were 10 minutes late, or because you burned the potatoes, or because you never listened to me. Of course, most of us have done this from time to time, but when we cool down, we hopefully can admit our mistake. Trauma interferes with this kind of awareness, and over time, our research demonstrated why. Okay. These next notes are from Healing the Fragmented Self, Trauma to Survivors by Junior Fisher. A biological basis for understanding compartmentalization under stress lies in the brain's innate fault lines, the fact that its functions are tied to and governed by different brain regions, and different differentiated structures within each region. One fault line for splitting available at birth is the right hemisphere-left hemisphere split. Though children are born with both left and right hemispheres, they are right brain dominant for most of childhood. The slower developing left brain has spurts of growth around the age of language development and again at adolescence. There's a growing growth spurt in the left brain hemisphere at adolescence. That's important for us. But the development of left brain dominance is only achieved very gradually over the course of the first 18 years of life. In addition, the corpus callosum, the part of the brain that makes possible right brain, left brain communication, also develops slowly and only becomes fully elaborated around the age of 12. 12 years old, the corpus callosum is supposed to be fully elaborated. Thus, in the early years of childhood, right brain experience is relatively independent of left brain experience, lending itself to splitting should the need arise. Studying brain development in children and adolescents, Martin Teicher has observed a correlation between a history of abuse and/or neglect and underdevelopment of the corpus callosum compared to normal controls, which would also support the hypothesis that trauma is associated with independent development of left and right brain hemispheres, and that deficits in communication between the two brains may hinder right-left integration, leaving clients with two brains instead of one integrated brain. The split brain research of the 1970s, which was led by someone I really want to meet, was the first research to show the degree to which left and right hemispheres of the brain operate independently and quite differently. Split brain research refers to studying patients whose right and left hemispheres have been separated by injury or surgery, or who have suffered damage to the corpus callosum. Although these patients demonstrate that there seems to be some shared knowledge available to both hemispheres, only the left hemisphere uses language to describe experience and information, while the right hemisphere is more visual, better able to recognize differences and similarities between stimuli, but lacking words to describe it. This makes me wonder if this has to do with my visual system shutting off. If I'm only operating from my left brain hemisphere, Could that cause a disconnect from what I'm seeing to feel connected with what I'm experiencing? Whoa. The right hemisphere tends to remember episodically and implicitly, whereas the left is specialized for autobiographical memory and acquired knowledge. But the left hemisphere's ability to encode information verbally does not imply that its recollections of events is more accurate. The left hemisphere has a tendency to grasp the gist of a situation. It has to do with making summaries like we were describing before. Make an inference that fits in well with the general schema of the event and toss out anything that does not. This elaboration has a deleterious effect on accuracy, but also makes it easier to process new information. The right hemisphere does not do this. It is totally truthful and only identifies the original information. This could be why there was a feeling like I was lying if I didn't say every single part of the implicit truth. There was a period where if I didn't say exactly what I was feeling or exactly all of the things that happened, I felt like I was somehow lying by leaving out information. That could potentially be an experience of right brain dominant consciousness. And I like that term, right brain dominant consciousness. Consciousness isn't just your mind. It's your mind-body-spirit connection creating experience. That is, the right hemisphere does not forget the nonverbal aspects of experience and does not interpret it. Emotions, these researchers discovered, are experienced on both sides of the brain, but can only be verbalized by the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere might act on the emotion, but could not describe it in words. I'm curious what it means by emotions being experienced. And without an exchange of information via the corpus callosum, researchers discovered that the left hemisphere might have no memory of the right hemisphere's emotion-driven actions and reactions. Another part of her book, she says, while the left brain self has been learning and storing competencies, these abilities have not been available to the right brain selves. Another part of her book, she says, the brain scan research slowly but surely revealed that the causes of these unique characteristics of traumatic memory. When research subjects recalled a traumatic event in their own words, the language and narrative areas of the prefrontal cortex became inactive, while emotional memory centers in the right hemisphere limbic system, especially the amygdala, became highly activated. With the left hemisphere language centers inhibited, these subjects were speechless, leaving the amygdala to fire, i.e., stimulate an emergency stress response, unchecked, as if the event were happening all over again. This research thus confirmed another characteristic of traumatic memory. Even if it could not be deliberately retrieved and verbalized, it could be activated by triggers, even decades after the event was over. Another side note, the hippocampus is the part of the brain responsible for putting experience into chronological order and perspective preparatory to being transferred to verbal memory areas, which is fascinating. Without a functioning, and she quotes von der Kolk 2014, probably The Body Keeps the Score. Without a functioning hippocampus or prefrontal cortex, the individual is deprived of an opportunity to witness what happened or to process it, and is left instead with only the sensory elements of the experience unintegrated and unattached. Now I don't know that her quoting van der Kolk was from The Body Keeps the Score, but it does say 2014. And on a separate page, Gina Fisher says, the left hemisphere is associated with more positive moods and the right hemisphere with more negative states. And she cites Hansen 2014. The medial prefrontal cortex supports an observing consciousness that enables us to hover above whatever we are feeling, so it can be experienced as a feeling in the body rather than lead to re-traumatization. She has a great description of dual awareness, pages 44 to 45. Describing these phenomena using the language of the brain would not have the same result as does using the language of parts. To say, I can sense my medial prefrontal cortex is curious about the negative mood state connected to the right subcortical areas of my brain does not evoke interest, emotional connection, or self-compassion. It's all about using implicit language, is really what the language of parts is about. In a separate part of her book, Gazzaniga, 1985, writes about the propensity as observed in split-brain patients whose right and left hemispheres have been surgically separated by removal of the corpus callosum. The right brain might take action on impulse for which the left hemisphere would have no memory, but nonetheless the left brain would construct a narrative to provide a rationale for the missing time or consequences of the actions. The researchers were struck by the left brain's persistence in establishing a motive and meaning-making even when disconnected from the right hemisphere's actions and reactions. Gazzaniga, 1985-2015, emphasizes that the left brain's ability to use language to rationalize the actions of the right brain increase the chance of the behavior happening again, and a potential risk to life in DID clients. Challenging false self-assumptions requires the therapist to believe that the ability to function is just as important as the ability to feel emotion, an attitude not always taught in therapist training programs. Functioning and feeling each represents a different hemisphere of the brain. The left brain prioritizes order, sequence, organization, and good judgment, while the right brain is driven by emotional and survival imperatives. The left brain is more positive in outlook because it has access to facts, while the right brain, though deeply emotional, is also more focused on the negative and on the threat, which has to do with the connection with visceral sensations in the body too, I bet. Both sides of the brain and both priorities are necessary to live a full, rich life. Owning the facts of one's life is a left brain activity, gathering information and categorizing it.